Somalia wasn't always a place of fighting. Many folks remember a different time, They talk about a country with a lively culture and a bright future. After independence in 1960, Somalia shone in the Horn of Africa. Mogadishu was called the White Pearl of the Indian Ocean, a city of grand buildings, busy markets, a lively social scene, safe streets. People from different groups lived together. They shared the same language, the same religion, and a strong feeling of being one nation, a time of hope for the young nation. The economy was growing, bananas exported abroad, livestock sent overseas, other goods shipped out, a working government, schools helping communities, hospitals providing care, Somali script standardized in 1972, massive literacy campaign teaching adults and children. The golden age was fragile, its foundations cracked, and the country would descend into years of chaos and war. The turning point for Somalia was the Ogaden War. In 1977, Siad Barre launched an invasion of the Ogaden region in neighboring Ethiopia. He wanted to create a greater Somalia by uniting all ethnic Somalis under one flag. At first, the war was a huge success. The Somali National Army, well equipped by the Soviet Union, quickly captured most of the region. A wave of nationalist pride swept the country. Siad Barre was seen as a hero. But the victory was short-lived. The Soviet Union, in a stunning geopolitical shift, switched its allegiance to Ethiopia. With massive Cuban support, the Ethiopian army launched a counter-offensive. The defeat in the Ogaden War in 1978 was a national trauma. The Somali army was crushed. The dream of a greater Somalia was shattered. This military disaster had devastating consequences back home. The economy, already strained by the war effort, began to collapse. Thousands of soldiers had died, and the government's prestige was destroyed. Siad Barre's regime became increasingly paranoid and oppressive. It started to rely more and more on clan loyalty to maintain its grip on power. In late 1990, the final assault on Mogadishu began. The rebel forces of the United Somali Congress closed in on the capital. The fighting was intense and chaotic. The city became a battlefield. Government soldiers, desperate and defeated, fought street by street against the advancing rebels. The remnants of Siad Barre's regime were collapsing under the pressure. For weeks, the capital was engulfed in violence. The sounds of gunfire and explosions became the soundtrack of daily life. The state, which had been weakening for years, was now in its death throes. The central authority that had held Somalia together, however imperfectly, was about to disappear completely. On January 26, 1991, Siad Barre finally fled Mogadishu. He escaped in a tank, leaving behind a city in flames and a country without a government. His departure did not bring peace. Instead, it created a massive power vacuum. The rebel groups that had united to overthrow him had no plan for what came next. Their common enemy was gone, and their internal rivalries immediately came to the surface. The dream of a new, unified Somalia died almost as soon as it was born. The collapse was not just a political event, it was a social implosion. The national army broke apart, with soldiers taking their weapons and returning to their home regions, often forming local militias. With the state gone, a new kind of leader emerged in Somalia. These were the warlords. They were not traditional clan elders. They were men who commanded loyalty through force and patronage. Many were former high-ranking officers in Siad Barre's army. They knew how to fight, how to organize militias, how to exploit the clan system for their own gain. They were pragmatists driven by a lust for power and wealth. Each warlord established control over a specific territory, usually based on the clan affiliation of his followers. Somalia was no longer a single country. It was a patchwork of warring fiefdoms. Mohammed Farah, Aidid, Ali Mahdi, Mohammed both were from the Hawaii clan, and had been leaders in the United Somali Congress, the group that ousted Siad Barre. But their alliance quickly shattered. Ali Mahdi, a wealthy hotelier, was appointed interim president by a faction of the USC. Aidid, a former general and ambassador, rejected this appointment. Their dispute plunged Mogadishu into a brutal civil war. The struggle between rival warlords Mohammed Farah Aidid Ali Mahdi Mohammed. It really defined the early years of the civil war. It turned the beautiful city of Mogadishu into, well, a total hellscape. Artillery shells, rockets, residential neighborhoods under fire, snipers picking off civilians, the Green Line, a no-man's land of destroyed buildings. Constant danger, families were torn apart, forced to choose sides based on sub-clan identity, severe drought, catastrophic famine, food couldn't get into the city, farmers couldn't get their produce to market. Warlords looted food convoys. Starvation used as a weapon of war aid shipments, seized at the port aid shipments, seized at the airport international aid agencies, struggled to operate skeletal children. The horrific images of famine and war in Somalia finally spurred the world to act. In late 1992, the United Nations launched UNOSOM-1. The mission was small, it lacked the power to protect aid convoys from the warlords. The aid was not reaching the people who needed it most. The United States decided to lead a much larger intervention. In December 1992, Operation Restore Hope began. Iconic photo of a U.S. Marine helicopter flying over the Mogadishu skyline during Operation Restore Hope. Thousands of U.S. Marines landed on the beaches of Mogadishu. Their primary mission was clear: create a secure environment for humanitarian relief operations, allowing food aid to flow into the country. The famine began to recede. The American soldiers were often welcomed by ordinary Somalis. The mission seemed to be achieving its limited humanitarian goals. However, the mandate soon began to expand. The UN took over in May 1993, creating UNOSOM-2. This new mission had a more ambitious goal: disarmament of the warring factions. This shift put UN and US forces on a collision course with Mohammed Farah Aidid. He saw the disarmament efforts as a direct threat to his power. He began to portray the international forces as foreign occupiers. The hunt culminated in the infamous Battle of Mogadishu on October 3, 1993. 2 US Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. After the withdrawal of international forces in 1995, Somalia was left to its own devices. The warlords were back in charge, and the country remained a chaotic patchwork of fiefdoms. For the next decade, numerous peace conferences were held, but none succeeded in creating a lasting government. A transitional national government was formed in 2000. A transitional federal government was formed in 2004. However, these governments had little real power. During this period of stalemate, a new force began to grow quietly in the background. This was the Islamic Courts Union, or ICU. The courts started as local initiatives by businessmen and by religious leaders. They wanted to create some semblance of law and order in their neighborhoods. They set up Sharia courts to deal with crime. They hired their own militias to enforce their rulings. People were tired of the warlords' endless violence and extortion. They flocked to the courts for justice and security. The courts were effective. They managed to reduce crime. By the mid-2000s, the various independent courts had united under a single umbrella organization, the ICU. They became a powerful political and military force. The warlords, who had ruled Mogadishu for 15 years, saw the ICU as a major threat. In a swift and stunning military campaign in mid-2006, the ICU's militias defeated the warlords and drove them out of Mogadishu. For the first time in 15 years, the entire city was under the control of a single authority. They reopened the port, they reopened the airport, they cleaned the streets. The warlord era in Mogadishu seemed to be over. The victory of the Islamic Courts Union in 2006 marked the beginning of the end for the old generation of warlords. Having been decisively defeated and chased from Mogadishu, their power and prestige were shattered. They were no longer the dominant players in Somali politics. Many fled to the provinces or sought refuge in neighboring countries. The military power they had wielded for a decade and a half had been broken by a more organized and ideologically driven force. The people had rejected them in favor of the security and order offered by the ICU. The warlords had become relics of a bygone era. The ICU's rule, however, was short-lived. Their rapid rise and the presence of hardline Islamist elements within their leadership worried neighboring Ethiopia and the United States. In late 2006, the Ethiopian army, with U.S. support, invaded Somalia to oust the ICU and install the weak transitional federal government in Mogadishu. This intervention ironically gave some of the old warlords a new lease on life. They saw an opportunity to regain influence by allying themselves with the TFG and its Ethiopian backers. They were appointed to positions in the new government, becoming ministers, military commanders. This transformation from warlord to politician was a key survival strategy. Men like Mohammed Konyare, Afra Muze, Sudi Yalahau, who had once controlled their own militias in Mogadishu, were now part of the government they had previously ignored. However, their power was greatly diminished. They no longer commanded large private armies. Instead, they became cogs in a larger political machine dependent on the TFG and its foreign allies for their positions. Their influence now came from political maneuvering, deal-making, not from the barrel of a gun. They had traded their autonomy for a seat at the table. The Ethiopian invasion also had an unintended consequence. It sparked a fierce nationalist and Islamist insurgency. The more moderate elements of the ICU were pushed aside and a new, more radical group emerged from its ashes, Al-Shabaab. This group would become the new dominant military force in southern and central Somalia. In this new conflict, the old warlords were largely irrelevant. The fight was now between a foreign-backed government and a powerful Islamist insurgency. The warlords had lost their place as the primary drivers of conflict. Today, on August 28, 2025, Somalia is a nation still grappling with the legacy of its civil war. The era of the all-powerful, city-ruling warlords is over. The political landscape has changed dramatically. The country now has a permanent federal government which, while still facing immense challenges, is more established than any of its transitional predecessors. International partners have supported Somalia. The African Union mission in Somalia, now ATMIS, helped build a national army and regain control over major urban centers including Mogadishu. Mogadishu is showing a fragile renaissance, new construction and a return of everyday life. The old warlords have largely faded. Some died of old age or sickness. Mohammed Farah Aidid was killed in battle in 1996. His rival, Ali Mahdi Mohammed, passed away in 2021. Others retired, living quietly in Somalia or abroad. A few moved into politics, members of parliament or other government posts. They traded military fatigues for business suits. Their influence is now a shadow of what it once was. They must operate within formal institutions, not command private armies. But conflict dynamics have evolved, not ended. The main threat today is not clan warlords but the Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab controls large rural areas and still launches deadly attacks in Mogadishu and other cities. The warlord era's legacy remains. Clan-based politics, distrust and weapons proliferation continue to challenge lasting peace and stability.